Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action, Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers. In keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, we ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and in recovery. This is the sixth session of the fifth cycle of the workshop that was presented on March 9th, 2024, where we completed the harms inventory portion of step 4. Next week, we'll begin step 5. If you would like to contribute to the seventh tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Where we're going is we're looking at the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. As an alcoholic, I can never be cured of the allergic reaction that I have to alcohol, but I can be recovered from that obsession that keeps me telling me that it's okay to do it, and it makes me never stop wanting to do it, never stop thinking about it. And the best place to start in order to do that, to have the obsession removed, is to start in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. The 12 steps are the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power and to stay surrendered from alcohol, which is making my life unmanageable. So merely reading the Big Book without experiencing it is useless, because you can't learn how to swim without jumping in the water. The way you become a better swimmer is to practice, practice, practice. And that's what the Big Book is teaching us. For years, I thought that just going to a Big Book meeting or going to a step meeting and reading the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, or the 12 and 12, that just by reading it and discussing it in these meetings, I thought that I was working the steps. I had done the best I could when I was new. When I came into the program in 1982, people were not talking about working the steps. They just said, don't drink, go to meetings. Don't drink, go to meetings. Meeting makers make it. Just keep going to meetings. If your butt falls off, put it in a bag and take it to a meeting. But the reality is, Not all meeting makers make it. I cringe when I hear people say that because not all meeting makers make it. I've heard people tell their stories where they went to meetings 2, 3 times a day. And one day, an hour after being in that meeting, they were in a bar drunk. So just meeting makers make it is one of the biggest lies in this program. Meeting makers who work the steps make it, but that's the big thing. And when we go into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the cover page states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. So I don't get involved in that recovering, recovered debate. If it says so in the book, in many places, it says we have recovered. And what gives us the definition of recovered means that the problem is removed. I do not have to make a choice whether I drink alcohol or not because I don't even think of drinking it. Remember, it's not an option. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. It's no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self-centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful. My old ways of destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new peaceful ones. And then when we get to the 10th step promise, which I love, there are lots of promises in the book. And this is the 10th step promise. And I love reading this because this is about living life. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time, sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude towards liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. Remember, he was talking in the song about give me a miracle. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It doesn't exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So we've got, this is what the promise is when we do this work. It's not by just not drinking and going to meetings. It is doing the work. Page 27 of the big book defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men are suddenly cast to one side and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. So I'm getting new ideas, new concepts, new motives. I'm not just looking at what's in it for me. I've had a spiritual experience, and in the appendix, in the spiritual experience, it describes recovered as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And now we're going to the forward to the first edition, which states, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. It later goes on to say the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to becoming recovered. There are other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. Now, we are already well into this cycle. I think we're at the 6th session. I forgot to write it down, but last week was the 5th, so this week must be the 6th. So we've already gone through the first 3 steps, and currently we're in the middle of the 4th step. So for anybody who's new that's here for the first time, if remember to send me your email and you'll get the recordings so that you can go back and see what you missed. So in step 1, we worked on we admitted we're powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And in step 1, that's where we have that self-knowledge. However, as a real alcoholic, and Bill Wilson found this out, it's in the stories, as a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. Remember, this is a mental obsession. And then once I put the alcohol in my body, it triggers the phenomenon of craving. Therefore, I am physically driven to take one drink after the other. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which brings us to step 2. In step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. But the great thing about that is it is your conception of that power greater than yourself. It's not mine, it's not Cindy's, it's not Tony's, it's your conception of a higher power. The insanity that they're talking about here is that when we pick up that first drink, we are not driven by that physical compulsion. We are at the insanity is that we pick up that first drink. We know we're alcoholic. We pick it up. We think it'll be different, and it's not. It's the same thing over and over again. It's what they're talking about in the sanity is not this crazy, stupid things that we do when we're under the influence of alcohol. The insanity of the second step is that we pick up the first drink. The crazy things that we do when we're drinking is from intoxication, and even non-alcoholics do stupid, crazy things when they're drinking. It's just that they don't have the physical allergy like we do. So once we come to believe in that power greater than ourselves, we're at step 3, where we made a decision. Remember, this is past tense. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. The 3rd step is only a decision. We do not turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him in step 3. Step 3 is the decision to do the work following, where we actually follow through on that decision is when we get to the 11th step. So step 3 is the beginning of the process where we tell God that it's up to God to build with me and do with me. And I'm saying, may I do this? Will you take away my difficulties? It's not saying he's doing it in the 3rd step. We're asking God to do this, and that's showing God we're willing to do the rest of the work. And the rest of that work starts with step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now, the 4th step inventory is broken into 4 individual inventories, which it's and they are the number 1, the biggie is the resentments. Then there's fears, And then the harms are divided into two separate categories, both excluding and including our sex conduct, the way we behave. So we're looking at our character defects, and we've already gone over the resentment inventory. And what we're starting to look at is our character defects. And this is from pages 64 and 65, which says that in most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relations, including sex, were hurt or threatened. On our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And once we look at that, we look at, well, what are these things? Our self-esteem is how we feel about ourselves. Pride. Pocketbook is our money, our finances, or anything of a material nature. Our emotional security, how safe we feel in the world. Our ambitions, our plans for the future, both immediate and down the road. And our personal relationships, how we interact with others, and our sex relationships. And then what happens is we looked at all of these parts of self, and it basically boils down into these four categories. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. Then we saw our faults. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. And that's right out of page 67. And when we did that, we started to look at these character defects. And the five main character defects that come up are that I'm selfish, I want to keep what I have, and I want things done my way. I'm dishonest, I'm a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I'm self-seeking, I want more than I have right now, and I'm frightened and I'm inconsiderate. And then these branch off into a list of other character defects, which would fall under some of the others. So for example, being a people pleaser is being dishonest and self-seeking and frightened all at the same time. But being a people pleaser kind of explains that a little bit better. So then we have an example of step 5. And I'm just using the one example. What we did in past sessions, we went through all of these straight from the list that is directly in the big book. And for those of you who are new, I did embellish upon a little bit in column 4 because the big book didn't tell us why we were upset with Mr. Brown. So what I did was I just added some additional things in here. And Mr. Brown is one of the famous people in there. I know Howard Ebert, who does the Big Book Comes Alive step study, has a poster on his wall. Mr. Brown needs his ass kicked, which I think is absolutely hysterical. But I was jealous of Brown, and therefore the character, and this is what we're looking at in column 5. We check off what character defects allowed us to do those things, and then we add the additional character defects in column 5. And listing these specific character defects is important because the big book lists mean, egotistical, indignant, self-pitying, self-centered, and self-delusional. And step 6 and 7 includes that we're ready to let God remove from us all of the things which we have admitted are objectionable. And then it goes on to say, and every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So while every character defect falls within the 5 major ones or a combination of it, it's better to be more specific. And again, here's that people pleasing example, because people pleasing gives a more accurate description of what I'm actually doing. And in reality, if you're anything like me, it's like the same thing happens over and over and over again. Only the faces, locations, and situations change, but it's the same thing. Because in reality, the same situations repeat themselves because our character defects continue to play out the same way time after time. So if you are a people pleaser, for example, you're going to continually be in situations where you agree to do things that you don't really want to do. You give people things that you don't really want to give them. And you don't stand up for yourself because you want people to like you. So therefore, you continue to be unhappy and resentful and start and always say, why does this always happen to me? It happens again and again because of your character defects that come into play. It's not the person listed in column 1 of your resentment inventory that causes your unhappiness, but the character defects that come into play. And these character defects are going to come into play in all of the 4 inventories. Then we did the fear inventory. And with fears, it's important to remember that we're only born with 2 fears: fear of loud noises and fear of falling. Every other fear is learned. And at this point in our lives, our fears are based on 2 things. Either we're afraid we're not going to get something we think we deserve, or we're afraid we're going to lose something we already have. And this is the fear inventory. We look at the things that we're afraid of. We write why we're afraid of them. And this is my favorite part of this. Do I realize that I rely on myself rather than my higher power? And then columns 4 and 5, first off, I've got to look at, this is the column where I'm doing the footwork so that this doesn't happen. This is where I have to change something about me. And then in column 5, I look at what character defects would keep me from doing what I need to do in column 4. So this is where we narrow it down to the character defects. This is where we left off last week. And now this week, we're going to be doing the harms inventories. So when we go through the harms inventories, again, there's 2 of them, one without sex and one using sex. And again, what it tells us is I harmed someone by doing what I did. The part of self, this is where it's a little bit different from the resentment inventory when we get to column 3, because in the resentment inventory, we looked at the part of self that was wounded by that resentment. But when we get into the harms inventory, we're looking at it from another perspective, where we're saying, what part of self got satisfaction from this action? See, in the harms, I did something to get satisfaction. So therefore, I'm looking at, was it my self-esteem? Was it my pocketbook? Was it my emotional security? Was it my ambitions? Was it my personal relationships or my sex relationships? Then I'm saying, what should I have done differently? And what will I do differently in the future? And I write that in the space. And then here is where I list my character defects. What character defects allowed me to do this? It was definitely, I was acting out of a character defect. So when we start with our harms inventory, it says, this is again from page 69, we reviewed our own conduct over the years. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Where were we at fault, and what should we have done instead? And this is a place where you can go back to your resentment inventory and look at that person, because just by having a resentment against someone is doing them harm. So this is a great place to start. So, and also for harms to others, using sex, it's the same thing, but you also add to it, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? So this is the example of the harms inventory excluding sex. And you can see, I put one up here as an example. And in this instance, I used an example, I used an institution that I had harmed, which was Bamberger's department store, which went out of business many, many years ago. But I bought a stolen skirt and sweater from a shoplifter. Therefore, it affected my pocketbook because I didn't have to pay the full price. And it affected my ambitions because I wanted to look nice. And now here's where I get into the what should I have done differently and what will I do in the future? So now we're starting to look at having an action plan for moving forward. So I'm not going to buy stolen merchandise. I don't care if they say it fell off a truck. And I pay for the things that I want, and I don't take what doesn't belong to me. And what character defects allowed me to purchase stolen property? I was self-seeking, dishonest, and I was a thief. So, and we would do this for everyone that we had harmed. The key thing in the harms inventories is to see what new behaviors I should be incorporating into my everyday life, which I list in column 4. And then the next one is the sex inventory. We list everyone we've hurt, people, businesses, anything and everyone in column 1. Remember to keep it simple. In column 2, it's all about you. It doesn't matter what the person did to cause this. It's only about the actions you took that hurt someone else. So you want to make sure that this is an action statement about you. I did something, I said something, I caused something. It doesn't matter if the person or business knows you harmed them or not. As long as you know it, it goes on your inventory. So if you have a resentment against someone and they don't even know it, they still go on your inventory, because just having that resentment is causing harm to that person. You may be avoiding them. You may not talk to them. Therefore, you're closing off the possibility of some sort of a relationship, and that's harming them. Column 3 of the harms inventory, remember, as I said before, it's the opposite of the resentment order or inventory. These are the parts of self that got rewarded by that harm. So you check off the appropriate parts of self that got satisfaction from doing what you did in column 2. And again, in that previous example, I listed pocketbook and ambitions because my pocketbook was rewarded when I didn't have to spend any money, and my ambitions were satisfied because I had the things I wanted. So what you do is you check off the appropriate parts of self. Wait a minute, I went too far. You check off the appropriate parts of self that got that got satisfied. And now next we're going to look at the sex inventory, and it's basically the same thing, but we're looking at the harms using sex inventory. and you list everyone that you've hurt through your sexual behavior or intimate relationships in column 1. In column 2, you list exactly what you did to that person. And remember, keep it simple. You ask yourself if the actions listed in column 2 created jealousy, suspicion, and or bitterness. And again, to reiterate, it doesn't matter if the person knows you harmed them or not. For example, if I was having an affair with a married man, his wife's name would be in column 1 as the person I hurt, because I was having an affair with her husband. Therefore, she doesn't have to know, because that might injure her or others. I think that would fall under that, but you definitely want to make sure you list that. Then in columns 3, 4, and 5, you check off the appropriate parts of self that got satisfaction. What should you have done and what will you do in the future? And in column 5, you list those. So for example, I had an affair with someone at work, therefore I hurt them. And what I checked off was pocketbook, because the guy spent money on me. Ambitions, because it just fed my ego. So what should I have done differently? Well, I should have acted professionally and appropriately at work, and that I pay my own way and not take advantage of people. The other character defects that were here were I was selfish, I was a user, I was inconsiderate and lustful, because I was having an affair with this guy at work. So keep in mind that we're not bad people trying to get good, but sick people who are trying to get well. We've done some pretty awful things, but those things do not define who we really are. And we have nothing that we need to be punished for. When we get to steps 8 and 9, we take actions to correct those harms. So in there's always that funny story that they talk about, is not to start dating while you're learning the steps and wait at least a year before getting into a relationship, or at least well into step 10. And this funny story that goes around is that this woman was working on her steps and followed the advice. So when she was ready to date, she asked her sponsor what she should do, and her sponsor told her that the answer to every question is in the big book, and go home and read page 69 for advice on sex. However, the woman was a little dyslexic, and she went to page 96 instead. And this is what she read as advice on sex. Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You're sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you have to offer. A big misconception, because if she had gone to page 69, she would have found the directions on how to figure out who she should be in her relationships, all of her relationships. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to the test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideal and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. So that's just kind of a little funny story that kind of has been going around the program for years about this. But remember, when you're working the steps, you're going to end up with the same personality. You're still who you are, no matter who you are with. And just remember that once your character defects are removed, you no longer have the negative consequences brought into existence by the behaviors you had when you were at step one, nor do you have inappropriate reactions to what's going on around you. As a result of all of this, all of your relationships change. The next instruction is on page 69, and it talks about becoming the ideal self. And it says, whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow towards it. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we work for it. And oh, I just realized. Let's stop for a second. This is what the worksheet looks like. And it's the ideal self. It's something for you to strive towards. And this is in the workbook on pages 140 to 141. And it talks about, you fill out this questionnaire for each relationship that you've done harms, and basically addresses, how have I been selfish with this person? How have I been dishonest? How have I been inconsiderate? How have I hurt them or anyone around them? How have I aroused jealousy? How have I aroused suspicion? How have I aroused bitterness? What do I need to do differently? What characteristics do I want to have that would make me, not them, the ideal person in this relationship? What character assets would enable you to do things differently? And then if I had these characteristics, how would I act when I'm with this person? And at the bottom, it says, this is the ideal to work towards. This is how I want to act in all my relationships. So that's what you would fill out here. And again, there are more forms that are available on the Google Drive, so that, yeah, there's an example of this in the text that I put together, but you can also download the forms if you need more, because sometimes there's a limited number in the binder, so you can download more. And this is getting us ready to start at our preparation for our fifth step. And this is what is the pre-step 5 item that you're going to do with all of your inventories when you're getting ready to sit down with your sponsor to do your fifth step, which we're going to be starting on next week, hopefully, God willing. Yeah, I think we're good for doing that. So now when we look at the inventories, the first thing we want to do is read the resentment forward. Okay, so I have a resentment against Mr. Brown because of his attention to my wife. It affects my sex relationships. Now, this is where I embellished upon it. I used creative license because the big book doesn't tell us this. But basically, what I did was, I was drunk and I didn't come home from work, and I stayed out all night. Therefore, I was selfish, I was frightened, I was inconsiderate, and I was jealous. What it doesn't say here is that part of his attention to my wife is, my wife calls him and wonders where I am. I've been out all night, and Brown goes looking for me. So that's what I did. All right, I'm resentful at Brown because he pays attention to my wife. It affects my sex relations. What I did was, I was drunk and I didn't come home, and my character defects were that I was selfish, I was frightened, I was inconsiderate, and I was jealous of Brown. Now, what we do is we reverse the resentment. And we start here. I'm mad at Brown because he pays a lot of attention to my wife. This affected my sex relationship. I got the ball rolling by getting drunk after work and staying out all night. The character defects that allowed me to get drunk after work and stay out all night were I was selfish, frightened, inconsiderate, and jealous. So now when I read it backwards, and what I did was I reversed the form here. So you see, I was selfish, I was frightened, I was inconsiderate and jealous. I was drunk and I didn't come home from work. I stayed out all night. It affected my sex relationships and he paid attention to my wife. So now what I'm going to do is I reverse that resentment and I say, if I was not selfish and self-centered, selfish and frightened and inconsiderate and jealous, I would have come straight home from work. I wouldn't have gotten drunk and stayed out all night. Then my sex relations would not have been affected because Mr. Brown would not be paying attention to my wife. This is a very powerful process. When I learned this, I was blown away because when I was taught to do this, I had this resentment against my boss, and I had lost my job, and I just felt that my boss was a terrible, and he wasn't the best boss in the world. He had his good points, but he was a human being. And when I reversed this and I saw where my part was, that if I hadn't done that, none of the things that I resented him for would have happened. And what happened for me as a result of doing this, I saw all of these resentments that I had in my life over the years. When I went back and I looked at myself, I saw how many of the major decisions that I made in my life, even in sobriety, were made as a direct result of a character defect. And it blew me away. So this is a very powerful portion for preparing for your fifth step. And again, you have this in the book. I think it's the next page. So you would say, okay, if I was not, put whatever what you did in column 5, I would not have done that. And then the things that are in column 3 would not have been affected because so-and-so in column 1 would not have done the things that they did in column 2. Or another way of doing it, wouldn't matter that Mr. Brown paid attention to my wife because I would not have gone out drinking and I would have been home with my wife. So that is the tool for preparing for your fifth step. It takes some preparation because you're going to be going with these inventories to sit down with your sponsor now to do your fifth step. And what's happening here is we're just looking at the facts. There's no blame, shame, or guilt associated with any of this stuff. Nothing is good or bad or right or wrong. We're just looking at the facts. You take responsibility for getting the ball rolling in each resentment, and then you realize it was your character defects that allowed you to do those actions in column 4. Again, as we get into the next steps 5 through 9 are going to help us to get rid of that stuff. And just a little thought that if when you reverse the resentment, something doesn't make sense or doesn't seem to run true, then either column 2 or column 4 is wrong, and you need to look at it so that when you read it, it makes sense. So again, when the rest of the steps are done, any remaining resentment may go away in a very short period of time. So we're getting ready to let go of all of that stuff. It's amazing when I think about it, where I had so many resentments in my life, and now I just think about those things as they were things that happened, but I'm not re-feeling the resentment. I don't have those negative feelings anymore. So if after reversing the resentment, you're still upset with the person, you want to put an X next to their name, and you do this for all of the resentments, then for the prayers that have an X next to them, you add these people to your morning prayers and you say something like the following: please, God, give so and so a great job, health, a loving family, great relationships. And you keep on doing this until the resentment goes away. You sit down and you picture them. You picture all of the things that you want for yourself, for them. That's what the big book says is the remedy for resentments. We pray for those people. And remember, it's important that we make a note that God will only do for us the things we cannot do for ourselves. So column 4 of the fear and the harms inventories lists the things that we're capable of doing. So what you want to do now is read what you wrote in column 4 of your fear inventory. What's written here is your action plan of the footwork you're going to start doing immediately to make sure that your fears do not come true. So again, you use the fear inventory, and then you look at the harms inventory. You read what you wrote in column 4 of your 2 harms inventories. And then what's written there becomes your action plan again. But this is how you're going to start treating people in the future moving forward. Where, if I just back up, in the fear inventory, it's about things that you're going to start doing to make sure that the fears don't come true. And then this has to do with how you're going to treat other people. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.